Okay, welcome to week 2 of the concept of the English language. We're going to be taking a look at more verbs in our tree of verbs. Last week, we started taking a look at the concept of multi-word verbs. We looked at phrasal verbs. We talked about transitive phrasal verbs, intransitive phrasal verbs, pure intransitive phrasal verb, ergative phrasal verbs, separable transitive verbs, inseparable transitive verbs, permanently separable transitive verbs. Yeah, all of these phrasal verbs. And if you remember correctly, a phrasal verb contains a verb plus a particle, and the semantic meaning changes. You cannot figure out the meaning just looking at the two elements. You have to know the meaning. Therefore, phrasal verbs are very much lexical items instead of truly grammatical items because they use the same tense aspect modality system as all other verbs, the TAM system. This week, we're going to take a look at two additional categories: prepositional verbs and phrasal prepositional verbs. So first, prepositional verbs. For example, he applied for the job. So if you look at this, first thing you look at and you say, looks like I have a verb plus a preposition, but is that preposition functioning as a particle or is it functioning as a preposition? Has the meaning of the main verb apply changed semantically? So if you look at these questions and then if you think it has, then try to apply the particle movement rule. What happens when we do? He applied the job for. Do you think people would say that in English? Probably not. And by the way, you notice the asterisk, the star before the beginning of that sentence? Whenever I use that, that means that the sentence is grammatically incorrect. Okay? So we could not say that sentence. Therefore, this is not really a phrasal verb. The meaning has not changed. Notice the job is a direct object. Therefore, this is a transitive verb. And normally, prepositions are followed by an object of the preposition. So what do I have here? Well, I have something called a prepositional verb. It's a verb plus a preposition. Notice I'm now using the word preposition. It's not particle. Particle applies to phrasal verbs. The verb and the preposition cannot be separated. There is not a new semantic meaning, but they're transitive. So what follows the preposition is not the object of the preposition, it is a direct object. Let's take a look at another example. Alice depends on her mother. Well, does the word depend actually change its meaning? It doesn't sound like it, but if I'm not sure, try the particle movement rule. Alice depends her mother on. Do you think we would say that? Probably not. And therefore you have the asterisk before it. So prepositional verbs are a verb plus a preposition. They are not separated. They are transitive. And the semantic meaning is very, very close to, if not the same as, the original verb. There are a couple examples. To call on, for example, that does change its meaning a little bit more dramatically than others. Those you just, I'm afraid, have to learn. And just so you know, there is a list in Toledo of the most common and most frequent phrasal verbs, broken into the different categories: prepositional verbs and phrasal prepositional verbs. Let's take a look at phrasal prepositional verbs. They mean exactly what the title says. They're a phrasal verb with a preposition. I guess I will have to put up with his behavior. The way to really see if these words need to go together is to drop the last preposition and see what happens. I guess I will have to put up his bad behavior. Sounds really bad to my ears. I hope it does to yours as well. Therefore, this is a grammatically incorrect sentence. Thus, it has the asterisk. Folks, it's important that you learn this because you're going to have to use this asterisk in class and on the post-assessment. So when you write a sentence that is grammatically incorrect, you have to begin it with an asterisk. And when you're proving things like multi-word verbs, you need to do that. You need to apply these tests and write sentences that are incorrect, but you need to know that they're incorrect, and thus the asterisk. What makes these different? Well, they're a verb plus a particle plus a preposition. The particle is part of the phrasal verb. The elements are not separated. You would never say, put his bad behavior up with. That doesn't work. So therefore they have to stay together. But they are transitive again. They're prepositional verbs, therefore they're transitive. His bad behavior is the direct object, not the object of the preposition. And a little different here, with most phrasal verbs and other prepositional verbs, the object is usually a noun or pronoun, but in this case it can also be a gerund complement. Let's look at both examples. Joan really looks up to him. The direct object here is a pronoun. We are looking forward to seeing you at the party. Seeing you at the party is a gerund complement, but it functions in this case as a direct object. You don't usually find gerund complements after phrasal verbs or other prepositional verbs, but with phrasal prepositional verbs you can. Alright, now, what's important? How do you really figure out what type of multi-word verb you're dealing with? Well, there's 4 tests that we can apply. We've seen the first test, the particle movement rule. Okay, so you know this, that most transitive verbs can take the particle movement rule. That is, the particle next to the verb can come after the direct object or next to the verb. Maggie looked up the address. Maggie looked the address up. Okay, this is what we talked about last week. Easy enough. Now, you have to look at multi-word verbs first to determine if the particle movement rule applies. And if it does, then we're dealing with, most likely, a transitive phrasal verb, because the particle can only move after the direct object. In an argument, Sam will always back up his buddies. Do you think this is phrasal or prepositional? Well, if you're not sure, try the particle movement rule. In an argument, Sam will always back his buddies up. Can we say that in English? Yes, we can. Therefore, back up, in this case, is a transitive phrasal verb. Look at this one. He stared at the target. Are we looking at a transitive phrasal verb, or are we looking at a transitive prepositional verb? Well, try the particle movement rule. He stared the target at. That doesn't work. That's grammatically incorrect. Therefore, this is not a transitive phrasal verb. Most likely, it is a transitive prepositional verb. So, if the particle movement rule works, it is a separable transitive phrasal verb. If the particle movement rule does not work, it could be an inseparable transitive phrasal verb or a prepositional verb. What we need to do now is go to test 2. Test 2 is the adverb insertion test. Remember, inseparable phrasal verbs cannot have anything between the verb and the particle, including an adverb, which most likely goes next to the verb. So, if we look, if the adverb can come between the preposition and the verb, then you have most likely a prepositional verb. If not, it is an inseparable intransitive phrasal verb. So he stared intently at the target. So the one we just saw before, we weren't sure, was it an intransitive phrasal verb or was it a prepositional verb? Well, now that I do the adverb insertion test, I see the adverb can easily come in between the stared and the at, between the verb and the preposition. Therefore, this to stare at is a prepositional verb, not an inseparable intransitive phrasal verb. So what you need to do is put all these rules to practice. So go to your study guide, and what you want to do is see, can you determine for each of these sentences if we're dealing with a transitive phrasal verb, an intransitive phrasal verb, or prepositional verb. Stop the video at this point, write sentences out. If the sentence is grammatically incorrect, make sure you put an asterisk next to it, and see if you can decide. Then come back to the video to determine which one is which. Okay, good luck. Okay, hopefully you figured it out. Let's take a look at he turned out the light. What did you say for this one? Well, the first thing I should do is apply the particle movement rule. He turned the light out. Does that make sense? Yes, it is. Yes, it does. Then the particle movement rule works. Therefore, this is a separable transitive phrasal verb. Easy enough. Let's take a look at she decided on the blue car. Can you move the particle? She decided the blue car on? No. So this definitely is not a separable transitive verb. But is it a prepositional verb or is it an inseparable intransitive phrasal verb? The test that you can use here is now the adverb insertion test. If the adverb insertion test works, it's prepositional. If it doesn't work, it's intransitive phrasal. She decided firmly on the blue car. Firmly works. The adverb firmly works in between the two elements. Therefore, the particle movement rule does not work, but the adverb insertion test works. This is a prepositional verb. So let's take a look at the last one. He ran into his cousin. He ran his cousin into? Particle movement? Nope. Adverb insertion? He ran unexpectedly into his cousin? Nope, we actually don't say that. That might not sound too bad to you, but we cannot say that in English. He ran into his cousin unexpectedly would be the right sentence, actually. So therefore, particle movement rule does not work. The adverb insertion rule does not work. Therefore, this is an inseparable intransitive phrasal verb. This is what you as a teacher need to be able to do. Now, there's two other rules that can help, and they deal with fronting the preposition. Fronting the preposition means that you can put it in front of a question word or you can put it in front of a relative pronoun, usually a relative pronoun that begins with the WH. All right, let's take a look at those two. First, the relative clause rule. Okay? And I obviously left something on there. All right, let's take a look at this. The man that they were waiting for was late. What's in brackets is the relative clause. Starts with the relative pronoun that. Waiting for seems to go together, so the preposition or the particle seems to be at the end. But is this prepositional or is this phrasal? If this is prepositional, the for can be fronted. That is, it can come before the relative pronoun. If it is phrasal, the for cannot be fronted. That's key. Take a look. The man for whom they were waiting was late. Because the preposition can be fronted, and we just changed that to whom, then it is correct. Therefore, waiting for is prepositional and not phrasal. Okay? So because the preposition can be moved or fronted before the relative pronoun, this is a prepositional verb. The particle in a phrasal verb cannot be fronted. That's key. So in this case, the dress which she tried on didn't fit. Can you front it? The dress on which she tried didn't fit. No. So try on has to be phrasal. Take a look at another one. The person who he depends on the most is his brother. The person on whom he depends the most is his brother. That works. You confront the preposition there. Therefore, depends on is a prepositional verb. Okay, so it can be very helpful. A third or a fourth test is the WH question test, and it works exactly the same way as the relative pronoun or relative clause test. Who were you shouting at? Can you front the element at the end? If you can, this then becomes a prepositional verb. If you cannot, it's a phrasal verb. At whom were you shouting? That works. Shouting at or shout at is a prepositional verb, not a phrasal verb. Okay, so it's the same concept. What are you looking up? Can you front up? Up what you are looking. Nope, nope, nope. Therefore, shout out becomes prepositional, but look up is phrasal because it doesn't fit this rule. You cannot front it. Okay, now this is important because you know we have that small class of inseparable transitive verbs. And we haven't really talked about them in these tests. But if you go through all these tests and they don't work, then you're left with an inseparable transitive verb. So let's see how that works. Takes this sentence. He ran across an old manuscript. Ran across. Is it phrasal? Is it prepositional? Is it phrasal prepositional? Well, we can cross off the last one because there's only two elements. There's not three. Okay. So if it's phrasal, is it transitive or is it intransitive? If it's transitive, is it separable or not separable? Okay. Let's apply the different tests. Start with the particle movement rule. He ran an old manuscript across. We can't say that. It's not a separable transitive verb based on the particle movement rule. He ran unexpectedly across an old manuscript. So using the adverb insertion rule, you really can't put unexpectedly between run and across. So it's not a prepositional verb based on the adverb insertion rule. So just to double check, you need to make sure that you might want to jump to conclusions here and say, oh, it's got to be, is it separable or inseparable? You need to know, I mean, is it transitive or intransitive? Old manuscript, that's an object. So you might be very careful here that you don't say that this is an intransitive because you do have an indirect, or you do have a direct object here. So now take a look at this one. The manuscript across which he ran was quite valuable. This is not prepositional and it's not inseparable because there is an object still. Across what did he run in the library? Again, not prepositional, not inseparable and transitive. So you applied the relative clause rule, the WH rule. Therefore, to run across has to be one of the small class of inseparable transitive phrasal verbs. And applying all four rules, or at least three of the four rules, will help you to see those. Okay, so in class and on your posted assessment for this video, you have to do some work with all these rules. Okay, so make sure you use your study guide to help you, and if you need, come back to the video whenever you need to review the 4 tests for determining what type of multi-word verb am I dealing with. Great, I'll see you in class on Friday.